Welcome back to yet another episode of Storytime with Mr. Bates. I hope you've all been doing well since my last upload. For today's episode, we'll be looking at an incident in history that I have always found interesting, the meeting between Pope Leo I and Attila the Hun. No long intros on this one today, so let's just dive in. This meeting took place in 452 CE, well after the start of Rome's decline. Rome was still a city, but it was remarkably weak, especially when compared to the empire that it used to run. The empire that it was once the heart of had withered away. By this time, it was little more than a crowd of huddled farmers, artisans, and priests with a band of tired soldiers led by senators to try and keep the peace. The city itself was still mostly standing, though some of the buildings had begun to fall apart due to disrepair. Basically, the best way I can explain this is Rome was like a shell of what it used to be during this time period. However, there was something growing in Rome, in Italy, and throughout the former empire during this time period, and that's Christianity. This religion had come a long way from the early followers having to meet in secret in the catacombs beneath the city. We talked about those before. Since Emperor Constantine officially became a Christian, Christianity became a dominant world religion. At the head of this growing religion was the Pope. Now, the position of Pope as the leader of Christianity is believed to be traced all the way back to Peter, one of the original disciples of Christ. However, there are certain sects, I guess you could say, of Christianity, denominations, that don't recognize the authority of the Pope. So, just important to note that. Naturally, this link to Peter gave the Pope considerable influence as Christians across Europe looked to him for guidance and wisdom. Remember, this was before the Reformation, so there was only one form of Christianity, and that was what we today call Catholic. The Pope during this time was Pope Leo I, also known as Pope Leo the Great. This is a title that he earns later on. He eventually also becomes a saint. A gray-haired 68-year-old man by this point, he was well beyond any years where he could have been a physical threat to anyone. He was regarded as a wise and just man, if a little harsh at times. There were some things he did throughout history that was, in my opinion, a little much, but regardless, he earned a reputation as a wise and fair leader. At the same time, Attila the Hun had been leading his incredibly brutal yet effective troops, the Huns, across Asia and Europe, conquering and pillaging everywhere they went. He had laid waste to several once great civilizations like Greece, Macedonia, and Thrace, and had even defeated the barbarians of Gaul. Those are the same barbarians that had fought the Roman Empire for decades when it was at its strongest. As a result, he and his Huns had gained a fearsome reputation as bloodthirsty, unstoppable warriors. Some even regarded Attila himself as a demon, let loose on the earth as a form of God's judgment. It's fair to say he was one of the most, if not the most, feared man on the planet at the time. They literally thought Attila was some sort of manifestation of like death or a literal demon who was there to end their lives as punishment for some sin that they committed. That's the level of fear that these people had for Attila the Hun. Now imagine, you're a Roman citizen, you're living in Rome, and you're getting all this news about this monstrous band of unstoppable warriors who are going around laying waste to all these different cities and civilizations that at one point were very powerful. You even hear that he's conquered the Gauls, who up until this point were not, they were no slouches in their own right, let's say, in combat. And now you hear that this monster has set his sights on what remains of your city. How would you respond to that? Many people during this time started to pack up, hoping to flee before the Huns arrived. Others tried to marshal what remained of their forces to resist the Huns, and still others turned to their faith, looking to the Pope to guide them through this. Pope Leo I, to his credit, realized that the fighting force that was being raised stood absolutely no chance against the Huns, and that everyone in Rome would be slaughtered if they even tried to fight. So he decided that he would go out to meet this legendary killer in an effort to prevent such bloodshed. Kudos to him. He recognized that Rome was not strong enough to resist the Huns, and that even with this fighting force that they're trying to marshal, to raise together, it was not going to go in their favor. If it came to fighting, the Huns were going to destroy Rome. When Attila's forces approached Rome, Pope Leo I, who I will now refer to as Leo, went out to the river Mincio to meet with the Huns, accompanied by a consul and quite a few Roman senators. For our purposes, we'll be looking at the account of Paul the Deacon. Now, it's important to note that Paul the Deacon is a Catholic historian, so the perspective that we're going to get from this source is a little biased. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot else out there recounting this exact meeting in any sort of detail as we get from Paul the Deacon, so that's why we're going to use it. According to Paul, Leo stood before Attila and said, "The Senate and the people of Rome, once conquerors of the world, now indeed vanquished, come before thee as suppliants. I pray for mercy and deliverance. O Attila, thou king of kings, thou couldst have no greater glory than to see suppliant at thy feet this people before whom once all peoples and kings lay suppliant. Thou hast subdued, O Attila, the whole circle of the lands which it is granted to the Romans, victors over all peoples, to conquer. Now we pray that thou, who hast conquered others, shouldst conquer thyself. The people have felt thy scourge. Now as suppliants, they would feel thy mercy." If that speech is a little too old and dusty for you, allow me to translate it into modern English. Leo starts off by admitting that Rome has fallen quite a ways since its glory days as conquerors of most of the known world at that time. He then asks Attila, almost begging, but not quite crossing that line, for mercy for the Roman people. He follows this up by pointing out that Attila conquered practically every enemy he has come across, and that a lot of what he conquered was once a part of the Roman Empire. Basically, he's comparing Attila to Rome when it was at its strongest, stroking his ego and trying to earn his favor. He finishes by subtly challenging Attila. Now, saying that Attila's Huns had conquered so much, but that he wasn't sure if Attila could conquer himself. He's challenging Attila to show mercy in this instance. In all honesty, it's a really brilliant way to handle talking with the Huns. He recognizes that they would lose if it came to fighting, but that Attila had already proven himself to be powerful and would gain nothing by attacking Rome. It's a very bold strategy to try to challenge a man who could very well just have you killed right on the spot. But Pope Leo shows his, strength of character, his bravery, by standing before Attila, recognizing that yes, you could kill me if you wanted to, but what would you gain from that? And trying to convince him to spare Rome by challenging him to assess himself. Kudos to Pope Leo for that. In short, yes. Now this is where it gets a little fuzzy. I mentioned earlier that Paul the Deacon is not the most reliable source because he is a Catholic deacon, so his obvious bias is going to come into play here. Paul the Deacon, the man who kept the record of this meeting, says that the spirits of Peter and Paul, two incredibly important figures in Christian theology and history, appeared beside Leo and raised swords over his head before threatening Attila with the wrath of God if he did not leave Rome alone. Now, obviously, you can choose to believe this or not. The only evidence for this divine encounter comes from Catholic sources, which is why many historians doubt its authenticity. No other sources of this encounter exist with this much detail, and so this divine intervention cannot be backed up. However, regardless of whether you believe it or not, Attila and his forces packed up their stuff, mounted their horses, and returned beyond the Danube River. Rome was spared the wrath of the Huns, and Pope Leo I was celebrated as a miraculous and heroic figure. And there you go. That was the time that the Pope of the Catholic Church turned Attila the Hun away using only his words. I find this one very fascinating simply because of the fact that Attila the Hun was one of the most bloodthirsty conquerors of this time period, possibly of all time. And he was persuaded to leave a city alone. Not just any city, Rome, one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world. And even though it had fallen quite a bit by this time period, Attila still would have known about it and would have likely wanted to conquer it just to say, yes, I conquered Rome. So he's persuaded to not do that, to give up on that goal with words alone. It's pretty great. Now let's take a look at the question of the day. If you were living in Rome and you heard that the Huns were coming to attack your city, would you try to flee, or would you join the group trying to defend the city? As always, leave your answers in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode. Please remember to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more weird, interesting, or strange history stories every Wednesday. If we can get to 100 subscribers, I plan to start doing videos on ancient myths as well. So please share this video with anyone else you think might enjoy it. As always, have a great rest of your day, you lovely, lovely people. Bye.